I like juicy fruit for flavor, but I'm usually chewing gum to freshen my mouth up, so I want minty.
I was mint for years. That was just without thinking about it. But they were out recently, so I got this grape stuff, and what I love it. So now I'm a grape guy. I don't know.
I'm going to pretend I'm from Singapore and I don't chew gum by law.
By law.
Good. Not allowed.
Hey everybody, it's the Data Driven Marketer, sponsored by NetWise. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Ruth.
Welcome back for another hang in the data basement. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our guest this week, Ruth Stevens, who is the president at eMarketing Strategy, professor at NYU, and a B2B marketing expert. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to be here, especially because my last book was titled B2B Data-Driven Marketing. So I was feel like
you just stole one of my points
Right
to
on.
fall back on if worst case we run out of anything to talk about. You've literally written a book called Data-Driven Marketing, so you'll fit right in here. Otherwise, yeah, do you want to just kind of jump into it and tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to be writing a book called Data-Driven Marketing?
Well, I started my business career in database marketing in the consumer world at Book of the Month Club, where I just had the best time because the data was available on all of our past customers. And this was a direct-to-consumer business. And we could literally predict how an incoming new member to one of the clubs was going to behave with pretty good accuracy, because we had enough data elements about them on their arrival to compare them to prior customers with similar profiles, and we could predict the ROI on that customer relationship within the first 6 months.
Wow.
It was wonderful. And when I moved into the B2B world after a good, nice career at Time Warner, I fell into lead generation, which is usually job one for a marketer in B2B. And that was so fun for me because it required almost entirely the same tools and techniques that I had learned in direct marketing, customer acquisition, and retention in consumer. And so I was at Ziff Davis for a few years and IBM for a few years. And eventually I went out on my own as a consultant. And I've been in B2B for about, more than 20 years now. And it's more fun, it's more challenging, more complicated, but larger order sizes and deeper, longer lasting relationships than in consumer. So it's got a lot to offer. And it's all based on data. So
Right.
It's
There's a lot more respect for the people with spreadsheets in the B2B and enterprise context, to be sure.
Indeed, because every account is worth so much more than any given household.
So I'm curious to start at the beginning of the story, I guess. Do you think, sort of, I guess, even from the data-driven perspective, are books, I guess we kind of have that sort of data everywhere now, but I'm curious, starting from the Book of the Month Club and sort of what you're saying about the amount of incoming data associated with that, do you think there's a unique aspect of that associated with the fact of books and readers? I have my own sort of experience in this space. I was in entertainment for years, and when Amazon fired up their studios, I immediately said, "Ooh, they're going to be a contender really fast." And people would say, "Oh, because they have a lot of money," and I would say, "No, because they have a lot of data. They know what everyone is reading, and it's not just they know the stories, but also you're sort of differently invested in a book than you are in other sort of throwaway types of media. It takes a long time to finish a book. And so their first series was Bosch. And it wasn't because they thought it was a good story. It's because they understood that they knew a subset of users who were already signed up for Prime, who had read 10 Bosch books, that would watch a series for sure. Right. And I wonder if that's, it's it's just more of, I guess, Jeff Bezos' original idea that if you start with books, you have a certain amount of, like, the highest number of SKUs, I guess, right? Which, if you think of it from a quant perspective, means you have the most data. I don't know if anybody ever thinks of it that way, but it's interesting that you bring up books in that context. I wonder if I guess maybe the broader question is, having moved through a bunch of different industries, do you see differences like that depending on the media type, where it's sort of like, oh, books are a better place for this type of data-driven decision, whereas, over here you get something else?
I confess I've never considered that question before. Based on what the story you just told, I certainly see a connection between book buying in Jeff Bezos's marketing database and his filmmaking editorial strategy. But I would actually look at Netflix as the paragon of filmmaking based on buying behavior, because they have the rental behavior the film rental behavior as a resource for predicting the need and interest in various categories. I had the fun of reading a memoir called by one of the two founders of Netflix, and the title, you'll love the title, "This Will Never Work," which is what he and Reed Hastings were told again and again at the beginning, and the rest is history. But he was actually a direct marketer at the beginning, so in his roots, and so it's a fascinating story of how he applied direct marketing thinking, database marketing thinking, to building a startup, which just took off.
Or even the understanding early on that, direct to consumer was an effective way to do stuff. I think even just about during my lifetime, it's like you had your Sears catalog, but there was still the Sears store. And then you kind of had the emergence of direct to consumer of catalogs where, I don't know, I think of like Land's End or LL Bean or those things where there was no actual physical, space, but I could still see how you would take that idea to somebody and go, yeah, but no one will ever, they want to go to the Blockbuster and they want to hold the disc and in retrospect, or even as a technologist, I look at that and go, that's so ridiculous. It's fun to browse the aisles, but like, it's not.
That's the human
really
bias people like to bring to their marketing strategies, right? Their growth and business strategies is, but you want to experience it, and I feel this way, and I feel that way, right? But it
and there's a very funny story, or a story in the book. The author is named Mark Randolph, and he tells the story about how Blockbuster called them in the very early days of their business, and with an eye to either, buying them or stealing their idea. And Blockbuster owned the video rental business at the time, of course, and they were just a startup, and it really wasn't thoroughly proven that consumers would be willing to to be willing to rent by mail, not to mention stream. And Blockbuster made them a very tiny offer, which they kind of, took a lot of time to reject. And the rest is history.
I've also heard, I can't remember where I read it, but then I've heard that the counter, this one's particularly funny because their arcs sort of cross both on the way up and then the way down. Because then there were acquisition talks the other direction. Blockbuster was tanking, and Blockbuster was going, "Hey, you want to buy us?" And they were kind of going, "No,
why?
physical."
Amazing how that stuff happens and how quickly. Right? That was probably 5 years in which that happened.
But there's a cultural thing too. Most people who run store-based businesses think like merchants. They don't think like customer marketers. So they don't build databases. The transactions are all anonymous. And that whole data asset is lost.
Huh. That's a really interesting point I've never thought about, right? Because you probably, as a sophisticated merchant, you probably do a lot of data-driven thinking around physical location and where a community is physically located near your store and footprint size and who's going to walk
and
by.
Merchandise array on the shelf.
Yeah.
And
yeah, interesting.
Like an understanding of the good real estate inside the store for the, like the end of the aisle and stuff like that.
Yep. So as a transition here kind of from consumer to business, the thing that I always see that is a big difference, especially around the data aspect of this, is consumer marketing, consumer products you have much higher volume of data, but what you're selling is much smaller dollar value. And you alluded to this earlier. And then you get into business and you have much, much smaller volume often of like customers and feedback, but the price point is way up. And you get this complexity where consumers, you can simplify stuff a lot. It's like green t-shirts sell the best. I'm really going to hammer the green t-shirt. But you get into business and it starts to be much harder to get good signal because deals start to get customized and more complex, and your market, every company you sell to they're harder to put into buckets and stuff. How did you experience that transition going between the two sides?
I was lucky enough to start at IBM in a division called IBM Direct, which was a mail order catalog. And we were selling small mainframes and RISC computing hardware through a mail order catalog, believe it or not. No, that was really a inside sales call center based closing environment. So the catalog was really a lead generator, but it was managed like a mail order ROI with testing and prices in it. So that was a nice entree. But really the bulk of the business is about Salesforce productivity, right? The business of marketing and databases in B2B. So that complexity that you mentioned is what makes B2B database marketing so interesting, because the account is the unit of purchase, you might say. But there's so many parties inside the account who are involved in the purchase decision. And it's really challenging to understand who they are, what's their agenda, which is, of course, a function of their job function and their role in the buying process. And sometimes you can infer one from the other. But that's what makes B2B really fun. The length of the purchase cycle, the number of people involved, and how each of them has a different goal in mind or a different agenda. So that means our communications have to be different to each of them to the extent that it's reasonably possible. But backing up from that messaging question, we have to have their names and we have to know their email addresses and and what their job role is and their buying role is. And that's a data acquisition challenge that still frustrates everybody in B2B. And don't get me started on retention. Or actually, please do get me started on retention maybe later in our conversation, because that's one of the great sub-optimized, under-leveraged, data-driven opportunities in B2B.
Yeah, it's actually a thing that I think we have a whole episode where we talk about the extent to which we don't think of retention. I mean, we said we would do it later, but whatever. here it is.
Yeah.
The concept that we bring up a lot is what we call the data-driven bow tie, which is ultimately like marketers are trained to think of things in terms of funnels, but that's not really what exists in exactly the ecosystem that you're talking about. Because once you close the customer, you're not actually finished. There's a whole bunch of communications and marketing that needs to happen for either upsells or just to reduce churn. And so what you're really looking at is, you have your funnel that gets it down to the people that sales should focus on. And then out the other side, you have a horn. And so you end up with a bow tie.
Bow tie. I love it.
Because out of the other side, you have customer success and you have, marketing continuing to work on that side of the funnel, which will actually also grow value, but doesn't fit in the ecosystem the way that we think of it in terms of, what stage of the funnel are they at?
Yeah.
Well, it's not really a funnel anymore once they're your customer.
Here.
And in fact, what you're trying to do is expand that again out the other side.
Right. So. And usually that's the job of an account manager type role. And those people have the same 24 hours a day that we all have, and they can't possibly cover the opportunity. So marketing has to step in and help them stay in touch, identify reasons to call, deliver nurturing, relationship deepening content, ask for referrals, and all the other activities that the account rep just doesn't have time to do. And if you look at the percentage of the B2B marketing budget, and I should say, where B2B marketers spend their time, perennially, it's 85% on net new sales lead generation and about 15% on current customer marketing. That just slays me.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Especially in the sort of SaaS context and stuff like that, where NetWise, for example, lives. The cheapest way to make a customer's worth of money for another year is just to keep a customer you already have.
Yep.
The idea that that's revolutionary to some people is still, it blows my mind.
That's another one that doesn't always translate from the consumer side to the business side, right? Because I don't necessarily need another small consumer item, right? But as a business, it's very likely that a business is ongoing and they're growing and there are other things you do that are complementary, upsells, cross-sells to other departments, so that is absolutely a spot where I see this crazy expansion of the marketing team, right? There's so many responsibilities now that's something that comes up on every episode that Adam has been saying for years to me is every company is becoming a media company. And that media is everywhere, right? The sales team needs it. The marketing team needs it on the way in. Traditional, we all get that. Sales needs it to support closing deals, especially in business. Customer success needs it to support keeping deals. The company internally needs it to coordinate. It's a crazy seeing how, because of the storytelling aspect and the data-driven approaches, that it's consuming aspects of every department in business now.
That's brilliant. When you say media company, you mean like a publisher, right?
Yeah, basically.
Content generator.
Essentially.
Content,
yeah.
It's the technology exists now that we can do this podcast, and now we have our own radio show.
Isn't that amazing?
Why not do that, right? It's the same with video. It's the same with everything. So easy to make now that it's at some size for every company. It's silly for them to continue to hire a consultant to make X, Y, and Z. You can just, hire somebody that's competent enough in-house and literally make videos with an iPhone. Like it's good enough now. So that's how I get to every company ends up a media company, I think, in the modern ecosystem. But then I think the interesting transition that our listeners probably are having to deal with, and that Brian and I kind of talk about, like you said, Brian, the expansion as the sort of data-driven storytelling methodology consumes all the different departments. The marketing ends up being the ones with the the department with the creatives to handle the messaging and to handle the, like all that kind of, we're used to handling the stuff you need in all of those contexts that Brian talked about, but marketing already exists. And there's already usually among the leadership and stuff, an idea of like what marketing is supposed to do. And so then you end up with this strange transition where it's sort of like, yeah, but here's this and this and this thing that you're supposed to be worrying about. And you're kind of like, yeah, but you also don't realize that sales is asking me for this and customer success is asking me for this. And in a way, it pulls all the departments closer together in a more collaborative way that I always find very exciting. But also it does mean that anyone who's out there right now labeling themselves a data-driven marketer, like, probably needs to learn how to go up the chain and advocate for the fact that they're actually being asked to do way more inside the company than just like run ads on Google and make sure that the messaging is consistent, which I think, at a big enough company with an experienced enough sort of executive team, they may not realize that that's what's happening down in those, the lower ranks as software kind of eats this stuff and things get more and more data driven when we can literally look at how messaging does on a singular Facebook post.
And, like you're also identifying a trend that caused my co-author, Theresa Kushner, to claim that marketing is dead. On the theory that the strategic and tactical functions traditionally known as marketing are now being diffused throughout the companies. One clear example is customer service. The call center that takes inbound calls and solves problems has traditionally been considered a marketing function. Analytics. I know. MarTech, which I know this is close to Brian's heart. Marketers are expected to be managing pretty sophisticated IT capabilities. And the IT department is sort of wondering, wait, how come I'm not in control here? So there's this diffusion of marketing activities into other areas of the company. And so it's maybe the flip side of the point you were making, Adam, that what is marketing? Like you said, what is data-driven marketing is not really clear anymore. Maybe it's become a cultural thing. In some companies, it means one thing, and in others, it means something else.
That's a really interesting way to put that I've never thought about, because we often are talking about marketing has become all these other things, but you're exactly the kind of the reverse perspective is marketing doesn't exist how it used to exist anymore. It's
because
gone.
It's everywhere.
There's something new happening here. Which I
either
think
way, it feels like a marketing is dead, long live marketing type situation.
Right. Yeah, and you touched on another aspect there. You're totally right. This is near and dear to my heart because everything is so technical.
We talk. I mean, one of our most successful blog posts is actually. Let me mute him real quick.
Oh, he didn't turn off his sound.
Yeah, this time he didn't mute.
That's so cute.
But we talk about it really often. One of our most successful blog posts is actually about how every marketer needs to be an engineer now, basically, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the title was. Keyword optimized to be sure.
Right. Right.
But
yeah.
It's really just about how it's so complicated now that it's not. It's a like I said, I think before we started recording, it's a different thing from when I first started 15 years ago, and it was very much like storytelling and coming up with creative and strategy for how you get that creative out, but it was all decided. And now it's so much more like running A/B tests and sort of doing scientific things that are, way more my engineer brain than my film school brain.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Well, that's actually why I took to direct marketing like a duck to water, because all of those conversations in a conference room where the seniorest voice would be the one that made the decision about what color. Oh, what a sweetie pie.
You're muted, Brian.
Haven't had to do this one before, but something in my wife's sunscreen just gave him a big allergic reaction. So she's showering real quick while I hold him.
What a cutie pie.
Say hi, Bodhi. This is Ruth. This is our friend Ruth.
Hi.
Yeah, wave, buddy.
Hi.
He doesn't seem sure about it.
I'll see if I can stay on mute and still participate for a few minutes.
The reason one of several reasons why I loved direct marketing, database marketing from the first day was that I quickly realized that it was all the decisions were made by testing and looking at the numbers, meaning the results of the various hypotheses that people came up with. And that just made the conversations in not only the boardroom, but also anywhere around the company so much easier, because you could say, well, thanks for that great idea. We tested it, and here's what happened. And so there's no decision making by whim or by the loudest voice in the room, which is typical of less data-driven marketing departments.
And I'll say that, having kind of worked my way up from a small agency that got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually we shut it down. Also, as a manager, it's easier to be in a situation where you don't feel like you're constantly crushing someone's dreams, because everybody that comes to you with a pitch, like, wholeheartedly believes in that thing. They're going, hey, what if we do this? And
totally,
if you have 10 years more experience, you can kind of really easily go, well, here's the reasons that won't work. And I hope I can say it in a way to educate you, but also you're going to be disappointed. And then the whole room's going to feel weird. And like, I love a world where all we got to do is get it down to the top 20 and we'll just run tests. And if it doesn't stick, we can kind of go, and hey, I'll talk to you later if you want to hear my theories on why that didn't work. And I get to have a much different relationship with the people that work on my creative teams than just we all sit in a room and I make 2/3 of them feel bad by the end of that meeting because their pitches weren't picked up. And also, I mean, I make it sound like, in that context, I'm the arbiter of what's going to work, but also I don't really know. I'm just guessing based on a gut feeling and the little bit of research I could do. And so, it just is more fun for me and not having to do that sort of negative aspect of the job anymore.
I totally get that.
If you let it be data driven. And then also I don't have to worry that my gut feeling is wrong in the same way that you have to if you're kind of the one at the nexus of saying that one, but not that one.
In fact, I often almost took pride that my guess about what would happen in the test was almost always wrong.
Right.
And it was sort of fun to be, I find it difficult to predict. But then the other fun thing is that once we have a lot of tests under our belt, then we go back and create rules and learnings that then become future guides and lore. And I have a shelf here filled with books by experienced direct marketers who have developed principles that have been proven again and again. And they sometimes now that whole concept is known as behavioral economics, where, a lot of famous people are talking about the vagaries of human behavior based on, or the vagaries of human decision-making based on their behavior, and how unpredictable and weird it can be. And I attend these lectures and read these books, and I say, well, I knew that. I've seen it a million times in direct marketing activity.
That's the most fun part about running a business broadly, but especially in a marketing space. This might be impossible.
Good.
That's my little boy. If you're listening, if we keep this in here, you get to take the art to a whole new level and tackle more complex problems than the ones that you're repeatedly tackling the same problem over and over again with every process. So data allows your job to get more interesting.
Yeah.
You agree with
that? But it has to be data that's reliable. And that's where we really get into trouble in B2B because our data is degrading at the rate of 4 to 6% a month. I mean, not every data element, but I think, Adam, you mentioned that during COVID, the degradation rates are even higher. Is that right?
Right. That's what we're hearing. I'm not sure Brian might have a better sense of if it's surfaced in our data yet.
That's a tough question we hear all the time. And we are seeing jobs switch a lot more. We actually just ran an analysis recently where jobs are switching at a much higher rate. So we're definitely seeing that for COVID. The general churn, it's a really hard one to pin down, right? You can kind of whatever you look for, you can see. So it's definitely super important though, right? You've got to be looking at, and that's the root of data driven, is looking for trends, right? Not looking for single pieces of information, right? So you should always be looking at that stuff, and because it's probably different by industry and by customer type.
Well, and so that's a pretty good transition, I think, to one of the topics we talked about before we started recording, which is just the broader idea of data hygiene, right? So, what in your view, I guess, constitutes data hygiene, right? Like, what are the repetitive tasks that marketers are probably not doing because they're not exciting, but I think is really necessary in that space?
Well, I think you guys know this better than I, and I can't wait to hear what you say about it. But I would put it into broadly two buckets. One is that the marketers often will ignore the fact of data hygiene. They'll complain about it. The sales team will complain about it because they couldn't get someone on the phone from the number in the database. But I see so many companies that are not even doing the basics, which would be, and here's the other bucket, things like standardizing the data against, data standards. Like in our world, the standards would be around the email address, deliverability of the email address, and the post office and getting the standard postal address correct, and then determining which of the accounts are important enough to do some of the handwork that's required to get the other data elements clean, like hiring somebody in the Philippines to call into your top accounts and find out if John Smith's current title has changed. And you won't want to do that to your entire database, but certainly key accounts. And then there are other things that are indicated. The number of account records that are incomplete, not only wrong, but incomplete, is really shocking in the B2B world. It's embarrassing that we're missing phone numbers, we're missing email addresses, we're missing titles. That's just ignorance or irresponsibility. Now I'm getting mad.
Well,
but if we're going to be data driven, we have to keep up. And the corollary point, I think that we tend to be guilty of in the B2B world is not taking ownership of our data and delegating responsibility for it to a database administrator or Mary over here who runs our database for us, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think an interesting aspect of this is that most people and most businesses still don't really have data-driven mindsets. They still don't really grasp the power of all this, and this has been really eye-opening for me, right? I've been in marketing now for 6 years at this company. My previous company wasn't really marketing, but it kind of turned into it by accident because there was money there. And so we followed our business model, had to shift. And I thought all of this stuff was so developed, right? It's so easy to go online and read about data-driven and analytics and optimization, but that content is coming from a very small set of people who are way ahead of their time. And when you go into any average business, nobody there conceptually, like at their core, has a foundation that says I need to do things this way and I'll make decisions this way, because it's unnatural until you kind of learn it academically, right? Because data driven is kind of a scientific pursuit put on top of anything, right? And so it's unnatural, it's weird. So it's something society's learning still. And I thought we were so much more far down the line, but really we're still at the infancy, which is really exciting, I think, from a nerdy tech perspective.
Yeah, and I would say all of the hygiene stuff you're just talking about, and even the ownership piece. You know, Brian and his colleagues before I came on board were upset about this enough that they started a company. So, you know, without trying to directly pitch our company, I mean, the product that we have now is an effort to make it easier for the marketers to take ownership, because they don't have to constantly be having awkward, half understood conversations with a data science team who are looking at this giant database. And they also don't have to worry about a lot of that hygiene stuff, because, you know, I think this kind of gets to maybe a place to talk about the next evolution of this stuff, where right at the edge, we're starting to see the emergence of companies calling themselves data as a service platforms. And what they mean by that is, you know, a paradigm shift further from what you're talking about to a world of, oh, well, I just go into the platform, I pull a list of names, I know it's going to be updated because the platform is the one that keeps it updated, and that's what we pay them for. And then I put that list into the marketing materials and, you know, et cetera, and don't have to worry so much about kind of the stuff that you're talking about. That is, you know, whether we like it or not, it's internal burden. You know, I think marketers, I agree, one of the, you know, evolutions of the marketing skill set is to understand what's happening in the data and how the data works and stuff like that. But there's a reason there's a data science team, because it's a whole completely different like type of brain that does that part of the analysis, right? So there's ownership, but then there's the actual execution of the hygiene and stuff. And even that world is, you know, starting to shift, which is kind of where NetWise, you know, does emerge ultimately. But yeah, I'm curious, you know, sort of from that standpoint, you know, like what you think on that front, because it's almost one of those things where we've been telling people about data hygiene for so long that we maybe won't need to anymore because the solutions will have emerged to make it so you don't have to worry it's somebody else's problem, basically.
Well, are you talking about my first party data on someone else's platform, and I can access it as a service with a password and you're managing it for me? Is that, or
that is one of the unique, I really don't mean to turn this into a NetWise pitch, but that is one of the things that we offer.
But I'd like to hear whether that's
data in there, fatten it with everything else that exists, and then essentially we're meant to be your data translations. Science team, to some extent.
Thanks for explaining that. I am reminded of the Outsourced marketing database, which has been a service offering as long as I've been in the data world. What's fabulous about the new offerings is that I have online, easy, user-friendly access to my own data, and as well as maybe prospecting data that you own and I can order up on demand. And you've meanwhile cleaned up and appended and completed my house file. Mm-hmm. So that access, because in the old days when I, as a business person, I would make the decision of, do I want to manage my customer data, my marketing database? Do I want to manage it in-house or outsource it to the likes of, say, Axiom or Anchor Computing or somebody like that? And they would do similar improvements and maintenance and so forth. But in order for me to access it, I had to like call somebody, get a list, or get a report. And the ease of access now is the big whoop in my view. So I can see that as really being an advantage, because frankly, the technical and experiential requirements to manage a complex data set is not something that any given company should really be investing in-house. There's a really strong argument to be made for outsourcing that to the NetWises of the world.
We talk about a lot. It's just complexity. The reality, particularly as digital hits database marketing, you can have so many records in there now that it's past the capacity for a human brain to really even have their head around. Like, we wouldn't be able to do it in the first place if spreadsheets weren't invented.
Right.
So, so it really is just, as things digitize, the complexity increases so
digital
fast.
Marketing communications, the response is coming. Setting up the split tests, for example, reading the responses, appending those responses to the customer record, so you have the history of the relationship. That's beyond complex.
Yeah,
that's edging toward rocket science.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're at the edge with marketing, where, and you mentioned this again earlier too, Ruth, where this is such a technical pursuit now. You need engineers in a lot of cases, right? You need IT to help manage systems and set things up and write software to understand your information. And we're kind of at a spot where the squishiness of all of this stuff is beyond current technical solutions, right? So I think I hear people talk about ad tech and martech and demand gen and stuff all the time. And they're like, why is it so fragmented? Why are there so many different companies and so many different systems? And personally, as an engineer, my perspective is computers aren't ready to solve these problems yet, right? These are still squishy human problems, and we don't have the artificial intelligence to do all of this at once, right? Because there's all this human relationship and network that's built into this too, that you're trying to kind of capture and categorize essentially into a spreadsheet. And it's just more complicated than that. So these are really, really hard problems that we're asking kind of an emerging or completely shifting field to kind of handle and figure out. So,
well, that's depressing.
Well, hopefully a computer will be able to do it for us soon, and we can all relax.
Right. Well, I was going to say, actually, as a way to wrap up, I think, because we're actually out of time here, I think that's maybe the delineation between the people that, are you a data-driven marketer or not? If that complexity is just sort of exciting to you, which is how I feel about it. I see that complexity and I go, oh, we can run so many different tests and we can try so much weird different stuff. And we can, these fractal split, just everything becomes a scientific test instead. Like, that gets me almost as excited as the storytelling piece. And so I'm like in a perfect spot as a data-driven marketer, right? If you feel that way, then you found your people in terms of data-driven marketing.
Yay.
And ultimately, to the shift we were talking about before, if that complexity feels super overwhelming, well, hopefully this podcast can help. It will continue to talk about it, but also that may be where you're right, Ruth, in terms of marketing is dead, because it might be a different position you're looking for now in this sort of ecosystem that's somewhere more along the lines of creative or copywriting or narrative strategy, or these other more niche names that maybe have, or niche titles or job functions that have emerged as the data piece has kind of eaten the broader moniker, because that that complexity just emerges everywhere that software suddenly hits. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ruth. This is a great
enjoyed
chat.
the conversation. Thanks.
Where, if people want to look you up, should they find you on the?
Well, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also the owner of a website which needs updating. Oh God, RuthStevens.com.
RuthStevens.com. I'm going to repeat that just because I think I talked over it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Like I said, thanks again for joining us, and thank you to all of our listeners for sticking around for another one. This has been The Data-Driven Marketer, sponsored by NetWise. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And I enjoyed joining you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Have a great day, everybody.